There's lots and lots of creation stories, aren't there, all throughout the world, from China to India, all over the world. And the Greek one, the one in Hesiod anyway, I think the thing that has to be said or made clear is that he talks about Gaia as though it's the Earth, the actual planet Earth, but also it's a woman. It's a personification. It's a personification. It is also sometimes it's talking about her as though it's a woman.
Yeah.
And then he does that with loads of other things like the sky, the firmament, or all rivers, or all mountains. But it's also a person, a god, a titan, or whatever.
Yeah.
And so that's difficult to get your mind around a bit. Or if you're not used to that, if you're not aware that that's what he's doing or that's what's going on, you know, if you come to Hesiod completely green, you'll just be like, wait, what is going on? How does that make any sense whatsoever? Well, it's just a little bit of a difficult concept to get your mind around, but it's even concept like a titan will give birth to despair or something, like a concept.
Yeah.
He'll give birth to fear or something. It's like, wait, what? But he's also a man, like a titan, walking around, doing stuff, having conversations and things. So it's a little bit odd and it's a little bit alien to us, but that is what's going on, and you've just got to get used to it, basically.
But this is why I want to talk about it, because these sort of personified wills of the collective thing that is something you can visibly see, but also has an intent behind it. I think it's interesting that there is no intent behind the creation of the universe.
Yes.
And I do wonder if this is one of the reasons why monotheism defeated paganism, right? Because there's got to have been a persuasive power to it. And I've always wondered what that is. And it sounds to me that a possible place to start looking is in the authority that the progenitor will has over the rest, right? Because there's no authority that created these things. These are just natural. But if you can install an authority above that, then you found the supreme God.
I think, in a way, polytheism was defeated because it doesn't give moral guidance in a way that a monotheistic tradition will. Because in a monotheistic tradition, it is one God that determines morality. Whereas in a polytheistic context, you don't really know. It's more likely
Gods
to
can have
erupt to a civil warfare, like we see, for instance, in several epics. Or, Zeus wants something, Poseidon wants something else. Who do you obey?
Yeah, there's contradictory commandments from great powers.
Yes.
But the thing is, like in Works and Days, he explains, no, Zeus despises this thing, don't do it, basically. So it's still got the sort of authoritative injunction towards morality that we would find in the Abrahamic faiths. I mean, I think that is a good point, that, it's contradictory, and there is a hierarchy of the gods. So I guess eventually you'd have to defer to Zeus. But I do think that being able to install an authority above the natural creation of the universe is probably the thing that won there. That gives it a kind of level of prestige, and like, my God is before your gods, and your creation myth doesn't include, and therefore mine must be the accurate one.
So you would say, that's interesting, because I've heard I think Thomists are using this, and they're saying that, for instance, they use the principle of sufficient reason, some of them, to argue for the existence of God. And they're saying that for every contingent event, there has to be a sufficient cause for it. And that's why they're arguing about a necessary being. So, for instance, they would argue for chaos. What explains why chaos gave birth into this?
Because you can imagine, sort of after the Alexandrian conquest of Judea or something, there'd be Greek scholars who'd go down and be like, look, have you read Hesiod? And they'd be like, yeah, but where does all this come from? And they'd be like, I don't know. It's like, oh, well, that's our God, you see. You could see how an argument could go that way, and actually it could end up being persuasive.
So let's continue. He writes, then she brought forth long hills, the lovely homes of goddesses, the nymphs who live among the mountain clefts. Then, with that pleasant love, she bore the barren sea with its swollen waves, Pontus. And then she lay with heaven, and bore deep whirling Oceanus and Chios, then Crios, Iapetos, Hyperion, Thea, Rhea, Themis, Mnemosyne, lovely Tethys, and Phoebe, golden crowned. Last after these, most terrible of sons, the crooked scheming Kronos came to birth, who was his vigorous father's enemy. Again, she bore the Cyclopes, whose hearts were insolent, Vrodis, Steropis, and proud-souled Ares, those who found and gave the thunder and the lightning bolt to Zeus. They were like other gods in all respect, but that a single eye lay in the brow of each. And from this they received the name Cyclops, from the one round eye which lay set in the middle of each forehead. Strength and energy and craft were in their works. And here is essentially Uranus's downfall. Then Uranos and Gaia bore 3 sons, mighty and violent, unspeakable, Kotos, Ys, and Vriareth, insolent children, each with 100 arms on his shoulders, darting about, untouchable, and each had 50 heads, standing upon his shoulders over the crowded mass of arms, and terrible strength was in their mighty forms. And essentially what happens here is something that Hesiod tells us both in the next paragraph, but also afterwards in the poem. And he said essentially that Uranos was angry with his son, and he bound them in cruel bonds because he envied them, their looks and size and overwhelming masculinity.
Yeah. Well, something to say there about the 100-handers.
Yes.
It's one of those things from the ancient world that's just bizarre. There's no other way of. It's very, very difficult for us to look on that in any other way. You know, like in the Bible, the descriptions of angels.
Or the Nephilim.
Yeah. It's just like, okay, that's odd. That's just odd. It's the 100-handers with the 50 heads, 100 arms, and 100 hands. Like, it's difficult to even picture what that could be, what that would look like if you had to draw a picture of it or something.
Yeah.
And they're unapproachable. They're extremely strong and powerful. Even the first Titans are scared of them and stuff. Well, they come back into the story later, don't they? It's one of those things. Again, I think like biblical angel, where it's like it's barely really imagine what you're supposed to be imagining. You know, like what is that?
Burning wheels of fire
with loads of eyes on it and stuff.
It's like, what am I looking at?
Okay. Or is it pure metaphor, pure allegory for something else? Doesn't seem to be. He doesn't ever. It doesn't really hint that it is.
It tells us it's a physical thing,
right? Yeah.
With 100 hands and 50 heads. Okay.
And,
I mean, if anything, it could sound like it's a military division or something. You know,
who knows?
Exactly. Who knows? Right? I mean,
it does talk about later with the Olympians an actual war. There are actually armies of them, and they're having wars. The 100-handers throw rocks, like 300 rocks, and all that sort of stuff. But it's just born out of a really, really early mind,
possibly drug induced.
God knows.
I mean, I mean it.
No evidence of that, but who knows? Possibly. Well, I mean, it's pretty trippy.
Well, the thing again, another thing that we don't talk about is the amount of drug use in the ancient world. There was a lot of drug use, actually. You know, there were lots. There have been various, ancient discoveries of people with psychedelic mushrooms and stuff like that in pouches, and so we don't know that they aren't literally tripping on something and having a vision of something and being like, right, okay, well, that's a vision of the divine then. You know, and we know that, Native Americans use peyote and stuff like this. It's entirely possible. This is just something born out of a fever dream.
Yeah, the 100-handers are, well, I use the word bizarre. I'm going to stick with that.
Yeah, it's a fair characterization.
So he has many themes here. For instance, it's interesting that he talks about love in the beginning as being taming force. And this reminds me a bit of the Epic of
Enkidu,
Gilgamesh and Enkidu and the was it the prostitute that tamed him? Yeah,
I can't remember her name now.
Doesn't Uranus push them back into the womb of the earth? He doesn't. He knows that they're too powerful for him. Oh, sorry, am I getting ahead of myself?
No, of course.
That's sort of the next bit, right? Is that Uranus, just like Kronos and then Zeus, there's a prophecy that his son or his sons or his progeny in some way will become more powerful than him and overthrow his rule.
Yeah.
So he doesn't eat them or anything. It says he pushes them back into the womb of the earth because Gaia is some sort of humanoid or Titan, but also just the earth at the same time. So it's like, but anyway,
it's not going to work.
Yeah.
So essentially, he, as Hesiod says, according to Hesiod, Uranus was envying them for their masculinity and their chadness. And essentially, he thought that they were insolent and shameful. And he was deeply insecure with them. And he sort of felt, I don't know, envious and emasculated. And as you said, he devised a plan to hide them from the world and Gaia and hide them at some corners of the earth.
Or under the ground.
Yeah,
right?
under the ground. But it didn't work because Gaia was earth. So
Right.
she understood. And that's the interesting thing here, because she gathered her sons and formed a sickle, I think from adamant. And she said that your father is the first who has performed shameful acts, and you need to do something about it and avenge this. And no one wanted to do this, but Kronos stepped in and says, I'll do it. And then he basically chopped his father's genitals.
So Kronos is the next one, right? He usurps Uranus as the top dog, if you like. So I don't want to get too sort of armchair philosophy about it and get a bit artsy-fartsy about it, but it is difficult or impossible to ignore the theme of the tension between father and son.
Yeah.
Of course, there's every spectrum. Along some dads and their sons are best friends.
Yeah.
And others despise each other or even kill each other and stuff. And even if you really, really love your son, there will be some sort of small element of being envious or upset when he becomes physically more powerful than you.
Yeah.
At some point that will happen. Your son, you'll get old, your son will grow up, and the reality that if it came to blows, he'd beat you up. That's not nice for a father to get, right?
Yeah.
And it's uncomfortable for the son, probably, right? So there's always some sort of tension between all kids and their parents, but particularly between daughters and mothers and fathers and sons. And so, that comes up again with Kronos and Zeus. It's the same thing.
I think there's good framing on this, actually, because as a kind of unrestrained natural tension, that's totally true. And this is why we have wisdom literature, because, of course, a well-raised son is never going to raise his hand to his own father.
Yeah, or like Aeneas, you would carry him on your own back to save his life.
Exactly. And so, as a description of, like, uncivilized man, yeah, that's a totally real part of existence. Like you said, the father gets old, he becomes infirm, the son is in the prime of his life, and so physically he could do this. And so that's a terrifying warning to if you have an unordered universe, an unordered civilization, then this is what you get, and therefore you need proper civilizing forces in the world in order to make sure things go as they should go, not as they could go.
I think that, sorry.
I was super quick to say, or that a father is aware of this long ahead of time, and to prevent it ever happening, he would kill his own kids.
Yeah.
Or deliberately not have any kids, or any version of that, so that it can never happen.
But notice how it's always framed as monstrous either way. Right. These are the monstrous natural occurrences that can happen when there is no order brought about by someone just like Zeus. Whereas Zeus brings about a just order in which we know our places and we do the right things and get to the right outcome and avoid the primordial chaos of fathers killing sons or sons killing fathers.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think that there's an interesting theme that we can extract about how the notion of wisdom is being used, because I think that the notion of wisdom and order are really tied together often, and it has to do with knowledge of order, disorder, and also the means to achieve a just order. And that is essentially, I think, where it is getting at, because for Hesiod, essentially, it's the rule of Zeus that is wise and good. And I think that may be a bit of a stretch, but I think that this is a theme in all wisdom literatures, because the message is try to establish an order. If you're supremely virtuous, then you're also asked to establish a social order. You're entrusted with drafting constitutions and stuff like that, and also know have the counsel and wisdom to solve tensions.
So I always viewed this sort of Uranus-Kronos conflict as being akin to like cavemen fighting. And I always viewed Zeus as being a kind of patriarchal civilization, as in, we have laws, these are the rules, and I'm going to enforce the rules with an iron hand. But these are the rules, and everyone knows the rules. And it's not just a free-for-all where people are fighting and doing whatever they can. And so I'm sure, you can probably map it onto the ascent of civilization and the creation of the city and things like that. And so Zeus just seems to be the correct ethos for a city-state.
And the major issue in Hesiod is that there's a difference between a just order and an unjust order. And it is because Zeus combines might, supreme strength, with which he won the battle of the Titans, with wisdom. So it's like saying you need to combine force and wisdom together. And there is also another passage in Works and Days where he said he is clearly cognizant of the circumstances that are required for justice, because he says at some point, I think, we will get there, but he just in advance, he does say somewhere that I wouldn't wish my son to be just where everyone else is unjust. That would be a sort of weakness. So there is an interesting theme between power and wisdom. And I think that essentially one of the major truths that all people were grasped and they were trying to impart upon other generations is that at the end of the day, we do have power. Power is irreducible and fundamental in the universe. We can't forget this. But there's also the question of how we're using it. And there's also morality. And the question is how to have moral standards for the use of our power. I think that's a fundamental.
Yeah, and Kronos is a great example of how power can be utterly misused, castrating his own father and then eating his own children.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.